Hey, what's up? Guess what time it is? Yes, it is time for another step-by-step tutorial. I'm excited because this is the first step-by-step tutorial that I've done since we concluded and uploaded our drawing principles playlist. If you've never seen that playlist and gotten to check it out, link to that bad boy is right there. I highly recommend that you do so before you jump into all of our step-by-step tutorials, because it's only going to help you. Now, with that said, we're doing a dolphin, which was provided to us by All Everything Dolphin on Instagram. Gorgeous photo. Absolutely love this. Link to their portfolio is in the description of this video. And let's draw this bad boy. Okay, so first we're going to be using a graphite pencil, a number 2 and 3/16 smudger, and a hoo-hoo eraser, a pentel click eraser, and a mono 0 eraser. Yes. We're also going to be using a sandpaper strip, a piece of tone check paper. We're also going to be using soft, medium, and hard charcoal pencils. And last but not least, the brush. Okay. So when we look at the first step at drawing this dolphin, we're going to be using what's called our contour line. And the contour line is used to define the edge of a form. I mean, you can think of it simply as the outline of your image. So here what we're doing is we're just ironing out the main outline of the dolphin. And in this step, don't worry too much about trying to get everything exactly perfect. One of the things that I do in my drawings is that sometimes if I'm halfway through with a drawing and I realize that maybe my proportions aren't where they need to be, I can just go ahead and erase the graphite outline and redraw it. Here we're just going to be using our mono 0 eraser real quick and just clean up some of these unwanted lines. And now the next step, of course, is to frame our form. I covered this extensively in my lesson on form. And essentially what we're doing here is we are framing the visible form in the reference image with a very light framework. And one of the reasons why we do this is because as we lay down our charcoal, this gives us a really nice base to work with. Because of course, if you remember from the lesson, drawings will only ever be in two-dimensional space, and it's your job as the artist to convey that third dimension. And so these frame lines definitely help with that. And now here we're going to grab our tone check paper. And what I've done is I've grinded some soft and some medium charcoal onto the sandpaper strip. Lay that on here. I'm going to take the brush and do a little tone check with some soft charcoal. Bear in mind with this step, what we're doing is I'm barely touching the paper. The last thing that you want to do in this step is push the charcoal into the paper. We do not want to do that. The cool thing about the soft charcoal as opposed to the medium and the hard charcoals is that it has little to no binder in it from the manufacturer, and because of that it lays very evenly across the paper, and it allows us to retrieve a lot of lighter tones when we go in to do detail work with our erasers. But if there's any place where you know for a fact there's going to be some darker tones, some lower values, right? You can go ahead and you can put an extra layer of charcoal in those specific areas. But again, just like when you lay down those higher values, you want to barely touch the paper. We do not want to push the charcoal into the paper. That's going to be saved for when we start utilizing our smudgers. And that's when we'll be pushing and solidifying the values in this drawing. And also this works because when you look at the reference image, dolphins, as with most sea life, tend to have very smooth textures, because they are water animals. And so the brush definitely helps us with that. Okay. That's looking pretty good. I like how that's turning out. But again, with this step, it's crucial. Barely touch the paper. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take a mono zero eraser. And this is a really cool technique. So essentially, when it comes to eraser work, there's basically two approaches. You can either save your lighter tones and thus your higher values by not laying any charcoal down on those specific areas, or you can do what's called retrieving, which is what I'm doing here. Retrieving is where we go back over those lower values and we elevate them to a higher value by taking charcoal away from the paper. I'm a big fan of retrieving my higher values, simply because I find that it's less stressful for me, and I really like the aesthetic that it conveys. But that's completely up to you. You can do either or. But one of the reasons why I like to retrieve my higher values is because I find that I have a lot more control. And it's very nice when you're drawing to have control like that, because what that does is that allows you to create drawings that really speak to the reference aesthetic. Now, I'm a big fan of Salvador Dali because, of course, he was quoted with saying that don't worry about perfection, right? You'll never reach it, is what he said. And I like that because whenever I am drawing, I don't approach my drawings with the intent of making them picture perfect. I approach them with the intent of maybe learning a new skill, or maybe learning a new approach or a new technique that I didn't know before, or maybe streamlining an approach that I didn't know before. So just keep that in mind. But here what I'm doing is I'm just going through and I am just retrieving the higher values in the water reflection. Water reflection is proven to be difficult. So hopefully this technique will help you in your future drawings. But now here we are. I'm going to take my larger smudger and grab some soft charcoal. And then this is where, remember how I said with the brushwork we were just barely touching the paper and we wanted that soft charcoal to rest on top? Well, with smudger work, we are doing just that. We are smudging the charcoal and pushing it into the paper. And thus what this is doing is this is conveying a lower value for us. And at the same time, the smudger is giving us much more control over exactly what we're able to do to that charcoal when compared to the brush. The brush is for moving very quickly. I've said this in past tutorials, where the smudger is more for streamlining and providing the drawing with that more finite detail. But the cool thing about this step here is that you can take the smudger, and what I'm doing is I'm barely touching the paper and I'm jumping around, and what this is doing is this is giving the drawing that blotchy look that you see on the dolphin's nose. And then the cool thing about it as well is I can essentially highlight the water reflection, the sun rays that are coming down through the water, by running my smudger along those higher values. And thus what that does is that basically makes those higher values pop, in a sense that they kind of jump off the paper towards the viewer's eye. And this is something you cannot do with your brush. So that's one of the reasons why I use a smudger for this step. See how I'm running the smudger right along that higher value. And the cool thing about this step is I'm basically killing two birds with one stone. What I'm doing is I am able to not only highlight a higher value, but I'm able to build a lower value. And if you're maybe new to the channel and new to these tutorials, and you're having a hard time understanding the terminology that I'm using, we do have a wonderful playlist that we've built out where I basically go into detailed lessons and I explain the fundamental concepts of my approach in shape, form, value, and line work, and all the terminology that I use, and I define those terms. And then I do demos and I show you what they look like on paper. So definitely check that out if that's something that you need. But here what I'm doing is I'm going in, and right below the eye there's some lower values here. And the cool thing about this is, remember, this approach, the 3-layered method, is all about layers. And so just because something might not look aesthetically pleasing right off of the bat, remember that this is charcoal. This is not graphite. And because of that, the initial steps might not look nearly as aesthetically pleasing as you would like, but remember, we're going through and we are going to be streamlining this with line work, more eraser work, and more smudger work, in order to really make this drawing look as realistic as we can. But now here, as you can see, what we're doing is we're going through and I'm defining the upper lip of this dolphin. If you look at the reference image, you can see that directly above the line of the mouth, there is a lower value, where it's opposite, that lower jaw, immediately coming from the line is a higher value. And so we want to make sure that we convey those. And then here what I'm doing is I'm just cleaning up any runaway charcoal, as I call it. Charcoal has a tendency to definitely run away from you if you let it. So this is one of the reasons why our Pentel Click Eraser is important. We don't necessarily use it on the drawing itself, but we use it on the boundaries, you know, if we accidentally smudge charcoal. So just keep that one in mind. And now here we are. We're going to do some line work. So I'm going to take a medium charcoal. I'm going to put a nice defined line right here. I'm standing the pencil up on end, moving in one fluid motion, and I'm bringing this line out. There we are. Now this line has a nice, consistent line quality. Now we're going to be doing the exact same thing on the lower jaw. We're just gonna let that fade off into nothing. And we're gonna put a nice defined line here on the nose as well. And then we'll run that up over the head and just kind of let that fade off into nothing. Now remember, with line work, it's best, especially with defined lines like the mouth and the jaw, to make sure that you have a nice consistent line quality. And remember, line quality is the thickness or thinness of a line. Now you can vary the line work, kind of like how I did with the top head, how I started at the nose and then I drew it back and then I let it fade off into nothing. That's what I was talking about with varying the line quality. You know, you start off thicker and then you fade off into nothing, and that will go to help convey that form. And now here, what I'm doing is I'm taking the pencil and I'm highlighting those sun rays that are coming down through the water with my medium charcoal. And this is something that it's very easy to overwork these highlights, but I find that if you just barely hit them, and the cool thing about it is you can always go back through and you can build these lines up more if you want. But one of the things that you'll find as we go through with smudger work is these lines will become less abrupt. So if you're sitting there and you're going, whoa, that looks way too heavy. That's way too much line quality there. Don't worry about that, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through with our smudger work. And remember how we were highlighting those highlights with the smudger, running it right next to it? Well, we're going to continue to do that with our smudger work, and thus what that's going to do is that's going to soften the line. And what it's going to do is it's going to cut down on that line weight. Now remember, line weight is used to describe the relative strength of a line, basically how dark it appears. So when a line appears dark, it tends to have a very high line quality. That's why it looks very thick or very abrupt, very in your face. But by using smudger work, as you can see here, we can lighten that line, and we can cut down on the quality of the line. See how that kind of fades, and that line isn't nearly as abrupt anymore, but yet it provides that definition between our high tone and our lower tones. This is what we want. This is that kind of aesthetic that appeals and that we like. And this just boils down to practice. That's all this is. Laying down charcoal and knowing 3 steps ahead of time the reason why you're doing what you're doing now. And that just comes with time. Before you know it, you'll have the 3-layered method down, and you'll be doing the approach, and you won't even know it. But see here, now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna run this line with the smudger, and then that'll kind of cut down on that line weight a little bit, but yet still convey that third dimension, that roundness of the dolphin's head. But the cool thing about this is, we do have those defined lines that we laid down with the medium charcoal on the highlights. But for every defined line, if you look at the reference image, there are also very many higher values that have more of an implied look, right? That softer look. They're not nearly as defined. And we can just convey that with those tonal variations. But then here, you can use a brush for this step as well, but I like to define that form. So what I'm doing is I'm running my smudger along that line, and this goes to soften it up, and it also conveys that roundedness of the underbelly of the dolphin. There we are. Okay. So here for the fin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a medium charcoal. I'm going to put a nice defined line right here on the outside of the fin. There we are, but I'm not going to run that defined line on the belly. I don't want to do that. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a soft charcoal, and very lightly. I'm not pushing hard at all. You want to be careful when you are laying charcoal down with your pencils, because even with the mixed media paper that I like to use, you can scratch your paper, right? So just be aware of that. Just very lightly. Everything in charcoal, and just remember, when it comes to application, putting that charcoal down onto the paper, do it very lightly. Very light pressure control with your hand. And now what we're doing is we're taking our larger of the 2 smudgers, and we're just doing nice tight circles. We're smudging that charcoal, pushing it into the paper. And the cool thing about this, even though it's all one very, very low value, right, is you can actually show slight variations in that lower value. Because remember, on the value scale, if you remember back to that video, we had multiple lower values. So you can convey that in your drawings. See how in the fin, the front part of it's pretty dark, and then the middle's really dark, and then the back end of the fin is lighter a little bit? That's what we want. And then here what we're doing is I'm bringing that third dimensional form, that how it's kind of wrapped around, and I'm pushing and making a darker line, and then I'm going up right here, and I'm pushing lighter still, and what that's doing is that's giving us a difference in lower values. As we get closer to the edge, it's getting darker and darker and darker, and that goes to show that form, that roundedness of the neck of the dolphin. But you can do all sorts of things with smudgers. Here what I'm doing is there's some blotchiness right along the jaw of the dolphin. You can go ahead and just barely tap, just press it and lift it, press it and lift it, and you can get kind of a more blotchy look. Or here, there's a darkness between, there's a lower value between the sun rays. You can go ahead and hit that as well. Yes, this looks really nice. This is coming together very well. But smudgers are very powerful. Always remember that. Okay, so now what we're going to do here is we're going to take our charcoal and I'm just going to define some lines here. Because as you can see, there is some darker values just underneath the eye of this dolphin. And so what we're going to do is I think it's time to define where that eye is. We're going to put it right here. There we are. That looks nice. And if the eye looks like it comes off the paper a little bit too much, don't worry about that, because we can go ahead and hit this with a smudger and we can smudge that out and soften it up. Okay. So we're just gonna do a little tone check right here. We're going in with our smaller smudger, our 3/16. And we're going through and we're more or less defining these water highlights. But these are the two big things. You can either highlight the water reflections with your charcoal pencil, or you can go through if you want a more implied look, if you want a softer look to those highlights, and you can accomplish that with smudger work here. Remember how in the value video we were talking about value relationships in drawing and how you can use those to your advantage to convey different aesthetics. Well, here in this drawing, one of the reasons why I chose the dolphin was because this really speaks to that terminology and shows you what kind of look you can accomplish when you have, say, a lower value immediately next to a higher value. And also remember, this isn't the smallest smudger. The smudgers pretty much go as small as you need them to. But the smaller the smudger, the more pinpoint control, the more accuracy you have when it comes to conveying whatever it is that you're conveying. But here what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm just highlighting any water reflections that need to be highlighted. And also, bear in mind, when you look at this reflection, the head of the dolphin is very close to the camera. And then as we go back farther and farther and farther, those lines become less and less defined. They become softer and softer. So really, when we look at this, the lines that I'm working on now and that last line right in front of the dolphin's fin, these are some of the last highlights where we're going to need to have a really solid line. Everything else will be implied. Okay. So now that I've gone through and I've highlighted those lines with the charcoal pencil, it's just more of the same. It's more smudger work here. Remember how I was talking about if you run the smudger along a line, you'll cut down on that line weight, you'll cut down on that line quality, and more or less you'll soften the line. And always remember this when it comes to line work. The more line weight something has, and the more line quality it has, the more defined it is, the more abrupt it is. And the less quality and the less line weight, the more implied it is, or the softer it is. If you can nail your line work in drawings, you'll elevate your drawings to a whole nother level. And also remember, if a lot of this here at this stage looks a little too gritty, right? Not soft like you would like it to be, don't worry about that. Remember, we have our trusty brush, and I'm going to be going through with this drawing specifically, and I'm going to be showing you how I soften everything up with brushwork to really give it that nice finished look. There we are. But remember, those tonal variations are absolutely crucial, especially when it comes to conveying that third dimension on paper. And that's really all it is. That's really the only big difference between a drawing that looks flat, more two-dimensional, and a drawing that pops and has that third dimension. So now here what we're going to do is we're going to continue to build the stomach of this dolphin here. And these are all implied lines here. I'm just going to build out and put a nice base layer on the dolphin's fin. And remember, with the 3-layered method, it's all layering. That's it. Everything that we do is layers. So now that I have that base layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a nice define line right here. There we are. Bring that back up over the top and then let that fade. There we are. Let that line weight get lighter and lighter. And now here what I'm doing is I want to have a lot of control because this is kind of a tight space to work with. So what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm laying that charcoal out with my pencil rather than going in and building up the value with a smudger. Now, if you want to use a smudger for this step, you can totally do that. I just find that it offers a little bit more control, and I like that. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go through, because this does look gritty, and we're going to just do some smudger work. We're going to blend this all together. Here we are. And this is going to give us a nice gradation as well, a nice blend across all our different values that we have here. Because here we have a lot of low value in the darks, and we have a lot of high value in our lights. But there we are. Let's go through, and I'm using the small smudger for this step as well. And as we go back farther and farther on this drawing, we're going to be relying on our 3/16 size smudger more and more. Just because it has a smaller head and we're able to get into those tighter spaces. But here I'm just going to continue to build this stomach up. And looking at the reference, this stomach's going to be a really good place to put a nice defined line. So let's put that defined line down. Go ahead and start from the back of the fin and then just pull it. And then just lift up right before we get there. See that? I like that. That looks good. That gives us dimension. And now here, I'm just going to take my brush. And this really speaks to a nice smooth gradation across our values. And it just blends everything together, softens everything up. And remember how I was talking about when it comes to sea creatures, whether you're drawing whales or sharks or dolphins or anything, with the exception of maybe, say, shellfish, animals for the most part they're very smooth, very smooth. And so a brush is a paramount. You definitely are going to want a brush in your arsenal. And the cool thing about it is, as you can see from here, when you hit it with a brush, all of your work, with very few exceptions, you're going to keep the integrity of all of your value relationships and all of the differences in your tonal values. You're going to keep the integrity of your line work. Because with the brush, remember how I was saying earlier, everything that you do on paper when it comes to charcoal, and especially with this approach, light pressure control. Barely hit the paper. Let your tools work for you. And they will. But here what I'm doing is I'm just going through and I'm just building up any lower values, right? Those darker tones. And through this step, as you can see here, when I lay down a darker tone, what this does is this really kind of showcases the differences between the forehead of the dolphin and the nose of the dolphin. And then here, if you need to, we can go back through and we can retrieve those higher values, right? So that's what we're doing here. You're doing two things at once here. You are not only accomplishing detail work, but you're also able to speak to those higher values. And this will give your drawing a lot of accuracy. And And this is kind of a cool trick too. Like if you want to go through and highlight this, remember with your eraser work though, underline form. This is something that I say in every single one of my drawing tutorials because it is very crucial. Every single thing that you do on paper, you do it with the understanding in the back of your mind that it is to help convey and accomplish that underlying form of your reference image. There we go. And not only that, but if you need to go back through and really bring that higher value out in your highlights, you can do that with this step. There we go. And you can accentuate and pull these highlights down farther if need be by retrieving them out with your Mono Zero eraser. And this is also one of the reasons why I love the Mono Zero, because it offers pinpoint control. Pinpoint control is something that will allow you to elevate your drawings and really get in there and be able to showcase definition and accuracy in your drawings. It's something that I just haven't really found with a kneaded eraser, so that's one of the reasons why I hardly ever use kneaded erasers in my artwork, but that is my personal preference. You don't have to use the Mono Zero eraser if you don't want to. Okay, so now what we're doing here is we are doing the exact same thing that we did in the first half of the Dolphin. We are using our brush. We are brushing the paper with a soft charcoal. We don't want to use a medium or a hard charcoal for this step because it has a lot of binder in it, and thus it conveys a lighter tone and a higher value. But not only that, because it has a lot of binder in it, in the medium and the hard charcoals, it doesn't flow across the paper nearly as easy as the soft charcoal does. And when you go to retrieve your higher values with your eraser work, you'll find that it doesn't work as well compared to the soft charcoal, and that's because that binder is in there. So just keep that in mind. But now, as with the first part, what we're doing is, now that we have that nice base layer laid down of our soft charcoal, we're able to go through and we're able to retrieve all of our higher values with our Mono Zero eraser. And bear in mind, guys, I am also moving extremely fast in these tutorials. If this was a piece that I would be making for a client, I would definitely probably be taking anywhere from 10 to 15 hours worth of actual chair time. But for the sake of this video, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach you guys fundamental ground level concepts so that you can take those concepts and apply them to your own drawings. And here I'm taking my Pentel Click Eraser and I'm just getting rid of some runaway charcoal. Charcoal everywhere. There we go. Okay. Yep. That's it. Okay. But now what we're doing is, if you look at the reference image, we do have some lower values. And so because of that, I'm just going in and I am hitting it with our 3/16 smudger. And remember how I was talking about the line weight and the line quality? As we move farther back on this Dolphin, those lines are becoming less and less defined in the reference image. So when we're drawing it, there's no need to continue to define those lines all the way back to the tail. In fact, I'm going to be showing you the differences in charcoal application as we get closer and closer to the tail, so that you can see how that aesthetic, you want it to get softer and softer and softer. Because when your viewer looks at this drawing, you want their eyes to be drawn to the front of the Dolphin first. And we've accomplished that with defining the highlights with our defined lines and our heavy line weights. But as we go closer and closer to the tail, those line weights and those defined lines are going to become less and less prominent and thus less relevant. Okay, so now what I'm doing here, so I'm just going to put a nice defined line on the fin. I'm going to pull that down. Just kind of let that fade off. Then here on the belly, pull that down. There we are. Wonderful. And now if that doesn't look like it has the proper form, don't worry about that, because now what we're going to do is we're going to take our smudger and we're going to do nice tight circles, and we're going to do that right along that line. And what this is doing is, as you can see, we're going from a nice heavy line quality and line weight, and we're lightening it up. That line quality is becoming thinner. The line weight is becoming less and less pronounced. But yet the line is still very much there. Now with our smudger work, one of the things you'll find when it comes to throwing a lot of charcoal around very quickly is you can use your pencils when you want to move fast and when you want to throw a lot of lower value. But one of the things I think you'll find is that it's better to use smudger work in that instance, because it gives you a softer look already. So much of the time when you use your charcoal pencils right off the bat to convey a lot of charcoal in a big space like what we did with the tail just now, you'll find that it's very gritty. Like here, see how I'm throwing this charcoal around, and I'm just very, very lightly, I'm putting some lines here, but I'm not bringing those lines to the very back of the dolphin. Now I'm just going to take the brush. I'm just going to hit this very lightly. This is going to blend everything real nice for us. And as you can see, it's not doing away with the integrity of our value relationships. It's just softening it, but it's not taking it away completely. And then here, if you need to go back through and bring out any values that need to be higher still, you can do that. And what this has done by going over this again with our Mono Zero eraser is this has allowed us to convey different tonal variations in our higher values. And this is something that your viewer's eye will definitely pick up on. So that's a quick little trick that you can use. Okay. But now here, same thing as what we did before. We're taking our smudger and we're just running it along, and we are highlighting those higher values with darker values. Now here for the tail, I'm just building this up. I don't like this line, so I'm just gonna hit it real quick with my Mono Zero. Give it a little bit more refined look. And here it looks like a little bit lighter of a spot, so I'll just very lightly hit that. Define this, pull these down. And remember, even with this eraser work, I'm still pulling it in the direction of that underlying form to make this dolphin have that rounded look. So now here what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a hard charcoal, because I don't want to use a medium charcoal, because a hard charcoal has even more binder in it still, so thus it has a lighter tone. And the cool thing about a lighter tone is that it doesn't jump out at the eye nearly as much as a medium or a soft charcoal does. But as you can see, the more you hit this underlying form with the brush, the more it'll pop out, the more it'll be conveyed. Just going back through and just bringing any midtones out that need to be brought out, accentuating any higher values in the light reflection that need to be accentuated. There we are. That looks good. And if you need to put any highlights down that aren't actually there in the reference image, but aesthetically do convey that underlying form, go ahead and do that. Like what I did here on the back of the belly. Clean this all up a little bit. There we go. Okay. So now to finish off this tail, looks like there's a little bit of a highlight here. There's one that runs down the edge of the fin, or of the tail. There's a little part right here. There we go. Okay, so now because this is a very dark value, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my soft charcoal and I'm going to pack this in. And remember, on the value scale, the soft charcoal, because there's hardly any binder in it whatsoever, it packs together very, very well, and it conveys a very low value, a very dark tone. And so that's what we're doing here. And even if this looks gritty like it does, don't worry about that, because remember, we're going to be going through with our smudger work, and we're going to be smudging all of that charcoal and blending it and pressing it into the paper. Right now it's very much just sitting on top of the paper, and it's kind of all crumpled up next to each other, but when we hit it with with our smudger work, it's going to blend it all together and give us a nice smooth aesthetic. We're just going to take our larger smudger for this. Just nice tight circles. Just blend it all together. There we are. And you can see why I was saying, like, when you're hitting your darker tones, your lower values up on the body, just use a smudger and just slowly build those lower values up because of how gritty it looks. Here I did it with a pencil because it's the bottom of the tail, and we're going to be smudging it out anyway. And the viewer's eye, because of the way this drawing is positioned, they're not going to be really looking at the tail nearly as much as they're going to be looking at the body of the dolphin. So now I'm just going to take a medium charcoal, and I'm just going to put a nice light defined line on the bottom of this. I'll go in here and kind of dress this up. But yeah, so when it comes to learning more, you know, if there was some terminology in this video that maybe you didn't quite understand, or maybe you want to learn more about, we do have our drawing principles playlist on our YouTube channel, and so definitely check that out. We have videos on all sorts of concepts and approaches that you can use with charcoal. You could spend hours on this drawing, but I think we're done for now. Remember, we are on Patreon. Huge shout out to those of you that are already on Patreon. We really appreciate your guys' support. Definitely check us out. We do have things like poll voting rights, early access to all of our videos. And in more recent news, we are on Skillshare. On Skillshare, I'm offering more in-depth tutorials. They're longer. They are class structured. We have discussion boards. So if you guys want to follow along and ask questions, I'm able to speak to those much better than YouTube. So definitely check us out. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe for more videos. I hope you enjoyed this one, and good luck in your future drawings.